When we're going to make a granny square, whether it's a giant granny square blanket like this or a granny square for a cardigan or small granny squares for whatever project, they are made exactly the same. So we work in rounds rather than rows. So if we were working rows, we'd work back and forth to create like a rectangle. For this, we're going to start from the centre and work outwards in rounds. So that means that we start in the middle and then we do our first row and we go around where this orangey brown colour is here. And then the second row, this beige colour here, we go around. And then this gold row, we go around. And then this green row, we go around. So those are sort of the rounds. And the great thing about granny squares is they're easy to learn. They're the perfect beginner pattern. This is the perfect blanket for a beginner. You can make it to any size you want. You could make a blanket out of lots of little granny squares or one big one, just like I'm showing you here. You can use any yarn you like. Just make sure when you look at your yarn ball, on the back there's a section here that tells you what size knitting needles and hooks to use. So this is a double knit weight yarn, so I need a 4mm hook. So that is what I'm going to be using for this blanket. I am going to be using Stylecraft Special double knit as well. So yeah, let's get started. If you are joining in with the Granny Love Crochet Along or my Dreaming of Autumn blanket, you are going to need copper, parchment, gold and cypress. These are shades of Stylecraft double knit. You're also going to need a pair of scissors, a large blunt yarn needle and a crochet hook. So let's zoom in and get started. So if you're following along with the Granny Love Crochet Along or the Dreaming of Autumn blanket, you're going to need to use copper for this first round. That's a shade of Stylecraft Special double knit. If you're not following along, then use whatever colour you like. So at the very centre of our granny square, we need to make a ring that we can crochet into. So a lot of people use a magic ring for this. I don't use that in my blankets because I find magic rings can open up over time. So instead I use a chain ring. So that's what I'm going to show you in this tutorial. So I'm going to start with a slip knot. You don't need to use the method of a slip knot that I'm using here. You can use whatever method you prefer. So I'm going to put my hook to the side of my working yarn and pull out. Then I'm going to rotate my hook 360 degrees. That creates that twist there. What that twist does is it acts in lieu of a knot. So now I'm ready to start my starting chain. So I'm going to chain 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now I'm going to slip stitch into that first chain. It doesn't really matter which thread you go under here for this bit. So, and then I'm going to do a slip stitch. So, it doesn't look like a ring at the minute, but if I give it a bit of a wiggle around, you can see we've got a ring of chains, and then that space there is where I'm going to be crocheting my stitches. Just there. Right, so now we're ready to start round 1. So I'm going to start with a chain of 3, and this counts as our first double crochet. 1, 2, 3. So for this round, what I'm going to do is, whilst I'm crocheting into that chain ring, I'm going to crochet over the top of this yarn tail, because that will mean that once I finish this round, I can pull on this yarn tail and pull close this hole at the centre of our square. I'll show you what I mean. So if you can, try to crochet over the top of that chain, that yarn end, lay it next to your chain as you crochet. So I'm now going to make 2 double crochets into that chain ring. 1 and 2. So this is what I mean about crocheting over the top of the yarn tail. I've sort of, it's inside the bottom of those stitches there. So for granny squares, however big your granny square gets, we are making these granny groups. So granny group is 3 double crochet together, and we crochet into the spaces between these 3 double crochet groups. So if you're not sure what I'm talking about, it will all make sense in a minute. So this is a 3 double crochet group, so a granny group, and what we're going to do now is we're going to chain 2 to make a corner. This group of 3 makes the side of our square, and then we make a corner space by chaining 2. Now I'm going to work 3 more double crochet into that chain ring at the centre. So 1, 2, 3. So hopefully you can see how a square is going to start to take shape here. So here is one side of our square, here's one corner, here's another side of our square. So now we've done 3 double crochet, we're going to chain 2. This makes the next corner space. So now we're going to work 3 more double crochet into that chain ring. So this is our first double crochet and our second double crochet and our third double crochet. So now we're going to repeat those steps again. So we're going to chain 2 for a corner and then do 3 more double crochet into that center chain ring. So 1, 2, 3. So you can see this looks like a little square now. We've got 1, 2, 3 corners and 4 groups of 3 double crochet to make up our square. And do you remember what I said about if we crocheted over the top of our yarn tail, we can pull it so that it closes up that centre ring? So let's do that. I'm just going to pull on that yarn tail. And you can see there is no longer a hole. Well, there's a teeny tiny hole at the centre of that granny square. If I pulled that tighter, that hole would disappear. There we go. So yeah, we've no longer got a hole at the centre of our granny square. So to finish off this corner here, you're going to chain 2 again for a corner. And then slip stitch into the top of that starting chain there. So we're going in there. And then slip stitch. So you could chain 1 and then fasten off if you want to, but what I'm going to do for this granny square is I'm just going to snip my yarn now and then use my hook to pull that end through. Then if I pull this tightly, that slip stitch tightens right up and almost knots the crochet together at the end of the row. So that's how you fasten off a colour. So that's our first row finished. So if you're following on with the crochet along, the next colour you're going to need is Parchment. So I'm just going to pull up some yarn and right, so now we're ready to join our next colour, but before we do that, we're going to turn our granny square over. So we're working from the back. So this is what the back looks like. You can see the stitches are sort of bumpy. And if we turn that over, the front is where the stitches are a bit smoother and we can see those V's at the top of the stitch. So we're going to be working from the back, and whenever you start a new round of your giant granny square blanket, you need to turn your work over. So the reason why we do this when we're making a big granny square, it doesn't matter too much with the little ones, but when we're doing a big granny square, if we weren't to do this, the square would slowly over time, the centre of it would start skewing and it would sort of rotate round. And this is because double crochet stitches aren't vertical, they're not straight, they lean slightly to one side. So eventually that very slight rotation is going to affect your square as it gets bigger. So to prevent that, we turn every work, and this means one row is leaning that way and the next row is leaning that way. So overall it balances out. This also means that your giant granny square blanket will be completely reversible, which is really handy. So this is the back of our work, and I'm going to pick a corner that wasn't the corner that we ended in. So we ended in this corner over here. So I'm going to pick a different corner. We'll just go with this one for this, and this just helps with weaving our ends in later. So I'm taking up a strand of my next colour, and then what I'm going to do is lay that yarn over the top of my crochet hook here. I'm sort of stabilising it with my first finger just behind there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a loop. So can you see I'm catching that new yarn with my hook and I'm pulling it through that chain 2 space, that corner space just here. So that's our next colour joined. I'm just going to take this yarn tail, and I find just crossing that yarn tail over the top of the working yarn stops that yarn tail coming loose. So now I can tighten that loop up and we are ready to start round 2. So to start round 2, we're going to start with a chain of 3. We start with a chain of 3 at the start of every row, and this counts as our first double crochet. So now we're going to do 2 more double crochet into that same corner space here. So that is our first double crochet, and then our second double crochet. So we've got our first group of 3 double crochet in that corner space. So next, when we work granny squares, we don't work into the top of stitches. So if you've learned crochet in rows, you will have gone into the tops of these stitches here to make your next stitches. For granny squares, what we're actually going to do is we're going to jump over to this corner space over here, and we're going to do 3 double crochet in that corner space. Some granny square patterns will tell you to do a chain 1 before you do this. I don't do this on my giant granny squares because I find when you do that, your squares end up really stretchy and holy, and I prefer sort of that closed look. So I don't do any chains between my granny clusters except for the corners. So we're going to do a double crochet into that next corner space there. We're going to do 3 double crochets, in fact. 1, 2, 3. There we go. So these 2 groups, these 2 granny square groups make up that side of the square. So we're going to make another corner space now, just like we did in the last round. So we're going to chain 2 to make a corner space. 1, 2. And now do 3 more double crochet into the same space, and this will make your corner of your square. It's our second double crochet and our third double crochet. So you can see that's made the corner of our square, and we're now going to move up onto this next corner space. So I'm going to do exactly what we just did in this corner space. So 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet. We're going to do exactly the same in the next corner space. So I'm going to do a double crochet, another double crochet, and a third double crochet. And then a chain 2 to make our corner space. Just pull up some of this yarn. So I've pulled up some of that yarn, and now I'm going to do 3 more double crochet into that same corner space. 1, 2, 3. So you can see that we've now made another corner to our square, and it's starting to look like a granny square now. That sort of distinctive look of what those 3 double crochet groups give it, that granny stitch. So we're now going to move over into the next corner space, which happens to be the one that we ended on last time. I'm just giving that yarn tail an extra tug because it had come loose a little bit. So I'm going to do exactly the same as what we did in these 2 spaces, and I'm going to do 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet. So let's do that. So there's 1 double crochet, 2 double crochet, 3 double crochet. And then we're going to chain 2, 1, 2, and then do 3 more double crochet into that same space. So here we are. We've now done 3 of our corners. And if we have a look, our next space is actually the space that we started on. So we've already got our second group of 3 double crochet there. So we need to do our first group. So we're going to do 3 double crochet into that corner space. here. And then I'm going to chain 2, just like we did before, and then I'm going to slip stitch into the top of that starting chain just there. And then I'm going to snip my yarn. Highly recommend a pair of yarn snips, by the way. And then I'm going to pull that yarn end through that slip stitch and then give it a good pull to sort of tighten that knot. So that's our second round of our granny square finished. So it's time for round 3. If you're following along, you need to use the colour gold for this round. So before we join our new colour, we're going to turn our granny square over. Remember, we're turning just before we join a new colour. And you can see that I've got yarn tails sticking out everywhere. We're going to ignore them, as I will show you how to weave these in another tutorial. So I'm going to pick a corner space again, and I'm not going to go for the same one that I finished in. So instead, I'm going to go for this one over here. So we're going to join this colour yarn just like we did with the last round. So I'm going to put my hook into that corner space. And then I'm going to lay my yarn across my hook and pull that loop through so that we can now start our next round. So that yarn tail, I like my yarn tail crossed over the top of my working yarn when I do this, because it keeps it nice and tucked up neat out of the way. So just like that, you can see it sort of over the top there. So now I'm going to chain 3 to count as my first double crochet. 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to do 2 more double crochets into that same space to make that granny group of 3 double crochet. So there's my first group done. So if we have a look at our granny square, remember we're skipping the stitches and we're going in the spaces. So the next space is not a corner space, it's along the side of our square. So when we come to one of these spaces, we do 3 double crochet, and that's it, no chains, nothing, just 3 double crochet into that space. So that's my first double crochet, and my second double crochet, and my third double crochet. So now our next space is our corner space. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do exactly what we did in the corners in the previous round. We're going to do a group of 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet. That group there is what we do in every single corner. However big our granny square gets, we do that group of 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet. So let's do that now. And I've got a yarn tail here, so I'm going to try and crochet over the top of it a bit. So I'm going to do 3 double crochet into that next corner space. So 1, 2, 3. Then I'm going to chain 2 to make a corner and do 3 more double crochet into that same space. So 1, 2, 3. So there we are. So you can sort of see our granny square is starting to look a lot like a granny square now. We've done that corner space and we've done that group of 3 in the space along the side. So if we have a look and we have a space along the side of our granny square, so this is the same however big your granny square gets. Like this granny square is 54 rows, and I followed this formula until this blanket is as big as you want. So when you come to a space that's along the side of your granny square, you do 3 double crochet. And when you come to a space that's a corner, you do 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet. And that is your formula. So if we look, our next space is a corner, so we do 3 double crochet, chain 2, and now we do 3 more double crochet into that corner space. 1, 2, 3. And then our next space is along the side of the square, so we do 3 double crochet and then in a corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to finish this round, and then I'll meet you back at this corner just to remind you how we finish off, and then I will run through what you do as your granny square gets bigger, just to reiterate some points that I've made through this tutorial. So here I am back at the last corner. I've already got my second group of 3 double crochet, so I'm going to do the other group of 3 double crochet into that corner. 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to chain 2, slip stitch into the top of that starting chain, and then do exactly what we did before. We'll cut off a yarn tail. So just a quick reminder when you're cutting a yarn tail is try to leave it long enough that you can weave your ends in later. I usually recommend 4 to 6 inches. So I'm going to pull that thread all the way through, give that a gentle pull to keep it tight, and then there is our granny square. Let's poke some of these ends through so it looks a little bit neater. So there is our 3 round granny square. So you could make lots of these and make a blanket, a cardigan, a bag, whatever, but you can also keep going until they're as big as you want them to be. You just need to follow that formula. The formula is before you join your new colour, turn it over, find a space that isn't the one you ended in, and we'll say this space for example. You get your next colour if you're following along with the Granny Love Crochet along, it is the colour Cypress. So we pick a corner, we put our hook in, remember to leave a bit of a yarn tail, we put our yarn over the top of our hook and pull it through that space, and then we chain 3, that counts as our first double crochet, and then we do 2 more double crochet into the same space. And then however big your granny square gets, if your next space is along the side of the square, you do 3 double crochet, no chains, and if your next space is a corner, you do 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet to make that corner. And this is the same however big your granny square gets. You can see I followed this formula as my granny squares got bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is how you make a giant granny square. I'm trying to find the centre to show you. There we are. So there's the centre of my giant granny square, and you can see we've made that centre there. So that is how you make a giant granny square blanket. I'm going to do another tutorial on how to weave the ends in, and then on week 7 of this Granny Love tutorial series, I'm going to release a tutorial on how to make this decorative border, which I designed to look a little bit like leaves.